If your surname is on this list, you are descended from a coastline that produced more famous pirates per mile than almost anywhere else on Earth. Wales isn't just where pirate history happened. Wales is where some of the most successful pirates who ever lived were born, raised, and buried their loot. This isn't folklore. These are real, documented men. Privateers who fought the Spanish Armada, buccaneers who sacked entire Spanish cities, and pirate captains who captured more ships than Blackbeard ever did. 15 surnames. Real pirates. Stay to the end, because the final name on this list belonged to the most successful privateer in history. The same man whose face is still on a bottle of rum 400 years later. Comment your surname right now if you think it's about to come up, because I want to see how many of you connect to this. Subscribe if you're new, because this channel covers exactly this kind of real, documented Welsh history every week. Let's begin. Wales' relationship with piracy goes back centuries before the Golden Age most people picture when they think of pirates. The Pembrokeshire coast, the Bristol Channel, and the sheltered inlets of Milford Haven made this stretch of coastline one of the most naturally useful bases for sea raiding anywhere in the British Isles. Close enough to major shipping lanes to strike often, remote enough to hide the loot afterward, and riddled with small coves and inlets that made chasing down a fleeing ship nearly impossible for anyone who didn't already know the coastline by heart. By the Elizabethan era, Welsh gentlemen were already blending piracy with respectability, sailing alongside Sir Francis Drake and Sir Walter Raleigh against the Spanish one year, and quietly raiding merchant shipping for personal profit the next. This blurry line between privateer, a pirate with royal permission, and outright criminal cost several well-connected Welsh families their fortunes, their freedom, or both, since a royal commission could be revoked, ignored, or simply outlived by the ambitions of the men who held it. Then came the true golden age of piracy, roughly 1650 to 1730, when Welsh-born captains didn't just participate in Caribbean piracy, they dominated entire chapters of it. Historians studying the period have specifically noted how disproportionately represented Welsh surnames were among the most successful pirate crews of the era, with several captains known for deliberately recruiting fellow Welshmen whenever they had the chance, treating shared origin almost as a mark of trust even among men who trusted almost no one. One Pembrokeshire-born captain would go on to capture more ships than any pirate in recorded history. Another, from the same tiny stretch of coastline, became so successful as a legal privateer that the British Crown eventually made him a governor. Here are 15 surnames tied to that story. Surname 15, Vaughan. Vaughan is one of the most common surnames across the Pembrokeshire and Carmarthenshire coastline, exactly the stretch of Wales that produced the highest concentration of Golden Age pirates anywhere in the British Isles. Parish and shipping records from Milford Haven and the surrounding ports during this period show Vaughan among the most frequently recorded family names connected to maritime trade, privateering commissions, and, in several documented cases, outright piracy prosecutions. Surname 14, Lewis. Lewis families were deeply rooted in the same Pembrokeshire ports that launched Bartholomew Roberts and Howell Davis into piracy. Welsh coastal communities in this era often blurred the line between legitimate fishing and trading families and the men who slipped away to sea on less legal ventures. And Lewis appears repeatedly in Admiralty Court records dealing with piracy and smuggling cases along this coast throughout the 17th century. Surname 13, Owen. Owen is one of the oldest and most widespread Welsh surnames, and coastal Owen families were heavily represented in the maritime economy of Milford Haven and Cardigan Bay, the exact network of ports, safe houses and smuggling routes that Golden Age pirates relied on to resupply, sell stolen goods, and disappear when the Royal Navy came looking. Surname 12, Edwards. Robert Edwards is recorded among the documented Welsh pirates of this era, part of the wider network of Welsh-born sailors who moved fluidly between legitimate merchant crews and outright piracy, depending on which paid better in a given year. Edwards's story reflects just how normalised this movement between legal and illegal seafaring had become along the Welsh coast by the height of the Golden Age. Surname 11, James. John James appears in the historical record as one of the named Welsh pirates operating during this period, part of a wider pattern where entire crews recruited specifically along the Welsh coast, since Welsh sailors had a reputation among pirate captains for being skilled, hardened by rough Atlantic conditions, and willing to take the risk that piracy demanded. Comment the number closest to your own surname so far. I read everyone. Subscribe now if you haven't, because the second half of this list includes the most successful pirate captain in recorded history. Let's keep going. Surname 10, Jones. Evan Jones is documented among the named Welsh pirates of the Golden Age, one of dozens of Joneses whose maritime record blurs between privateering commission and outright piracy, depending on which document survives. Jones remains, to this day, one of the most common surnames in Wales, meaning an enormous number of people carrying this name today have at least one branch of the family tree running straight through this exact coastline during this exact era. Surname 9, Williams. David Williams is recorded among the Golden Age Welsh pirates, another name pulled directly from Admiralty and court records dealing with piracy prosecutions along the Bristol Channel and Pembrokeshire coast. Like Jones, Williams remains an extremely common Welsh surname today, meaning this connection likely touches far more living descendants than most people would assume. Surname 8, Evans. John Evans operated primarily out of Grand Cayman, using the island's isolation as a base to raid shipping throughout the wider Caribbean, a pattern common among Welsh pirates of this era, many of whom preferred small defensible island bases over larger, more heavily patrolled ports. Surname 7, Callis. John Callis operated nearly a century before the Golden Age most people associate with piracy, terrorizing shipping along the Severn Estuary and Bristol Channel throughout the Elizabethan era, using his intimate knowledge of the estuary's currents and hidden channels to strike merchant vessels and vanish before any pursuit could organize. His reputation grew significant enough that Elizabethan authorities dedicated real resources to hunting him down, an unusual level of attention for a regional pirate rather than one operating in more prestigious international waters. Callis was eventually captured, tried and hanged in 1576, making him one of the earliest documented Welsh pirates on record, and proof that Wales' relationship with piracy stretches back far further than the Caribbean's more famous Golden Age a century later. Surname 6, Prys. Thomas Prys of Plas Ireland in Denbighshire lived a double life almost nobody expects from a Welsh landowner, soldier, celebrated poet and buccaneer. Eldest son of a prominent local family, he fought in the Netherlands under the Earl of Leicester, stood with the army defending London against the Spanish Armada in 1588, and sailed on expeditions under both Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake. Later in life, he bought his own ship and went buccaneering along the Spanish coast, an adventure he wrote about himself in Welsh language poetry, describing the experience in vivid, often self-mocking detail, before eventually swearing off the sea entirely, joking in verse that he'd rather herd sheep than ever buy another ship. He served as Sheriff of Denbighshire in 1599, married twice and fathered 13 children between his two wives. Proof that even a buccaneer's life eventually settled into something resembling ordinary Welsh gentry. If your surname is Prys, or the anglicised Price, you carry the name of a man who turned piracy into literature and lived long enough to laugh about it. Surname 5, Griffith. Piers Griffith of Penrhyn near Bangor was a Welsh landowner, poet and pirate whose double life eventually caught up with him. Son of a Carnarvonshire sheriff, he inherited a substantial estate as a young man and used his wealth to equip his own privateering ships, sailing alongside both Drake and Raleigh in campaigns against Spain. But by the reign of King James I, with England and Spain now at peace, the Spanish ambassador accused Griffith of piracy so persistently and so publicly that Griffith was eventually forced to sell off his family estate simply to buy himself a royal pardon. Admiralty records confirm at least one seized Spanish cargo ship, carrying oil, olives and silk, was brought into a Welsh harbour under Griffith's command in the year 1600. Despite everything, the accusations, the ruined estate, the narrowly avoided execution, he was eventually buried in Westminster Abbey, one of the very few pirates in history to end up resting among kings and poets rather than at the end of a rope. Comment pirate if you've made it this far, and subscribe now, because the final 3 names include the most successful pirate captain who ever lived. Surname 4, Skyrme. James Skyrme sailed from Bristol as first mate of the merchant ship Greyhound in 1720 until Bartholomew Roberts captured his vessel off St. Lucia and gave him a choice most sailors in this position faced: join the pirate crew or die. Skyrme joined, rose quickly, and was eventually given command of a captured French vessel Roberts renamed Ranger. In February 1722, when the Royal Navy's HMS Swallow appeared, and Roberts mistook it for a fleeing merchant ship, he sent Skyrme's Ranger ahead to intercept it, sailing straight into what turned out to be the Battle of Cape Lopez, the engagement that would end both Roberts and Skyrme's careers within days of each other. Skyrme was captured in the aftermath and hanged shortly afterward, one of dozens of Roberts' crew executed once the Royal Navy finally brought the most successful pirate operation of the era to an end. Surname 3, Davis. Hal Davis, born near Milford Haven, had one of the shortest but most spectacular pirate careers on record, just 11 months from start to finish. Davis, like Roberts after him, didn't choose piracy at first. He was captured by pirates himself while serving as a mate, and only later broke away to captain his own crew. A master of deception rather than brute force, Davis once posed as a legitimate privateer to infiltrate a Royal African Company slaving fort in Gambia, captured its commander at a welcoming dinner thrown in his own honour, and held him for a ransom of £2,000 in gold. On another occasion, he tricked a heavily armed French ship into surrendering simply by flying a pirate flag from a smaller vessel he'd recently captured, convincing the French captain he was hopelessly outgunned when he wasn't. Davis was killed in June 1719, ambushed while attempting to kidnap the Portuguese governor of Principe Island in a scheme that mirrored his earlier Gambia ransom almost exactly. But this time, the trap was sprung on him instead. He didn't live to see it, but he'd already mentored the man who would go on to become the single most successful pirate in history. Surname 2, Roberts. Bartholomew Roberts, known to history as Black Bart, was born in Little Newcastle, Pembrokeshire, and became, by any measure, the most successful pirate who ever lived, capturing somewhere between 400 and 500 ships during his career, far more than Blackbeard or any other pirate captain on record. Roberts never intended to become a pirate at all. He was serving as third mate on a slave ship when Hal Davis captured it and forced him into piracy, only for Roberts to rise to captain himself within weeks of Davis's death, elected by the crew almost immediately. Roberts despised drunkenness and gambling aboard his ships, ran a stricter code than most pirate crews of the era, and dressed with famous, almost theatrical elegance in battle, reportedly wearing a crimson waistcoat and feathered hat even during combat. He was killed on February 10th, 1722, struck by grapeshot during a battle against the Royal Navy warship HMS Swallow, commanded by Captain Challoner Ogle, who was later knighted specifically for finally ending Roberts's career. Per Roberts' own standing orders, given to his crew in advance, his body was thrown overboard in full pirate regalia, rather than let his corpse be captured and displayed by the crown as a trophy. Surname 1, Morgan. We end with the most famous name in this entire story. Henry Morgan was born in Llanrumney, near Cardiff, in 1635, and became one of the most successful privateers in recorded history, commissioned by the English crown to raid Spanish colonies throughout the Caribbean, sacking cities including Portobelo and Panama City, with a mix of brutal efficiency and genuine tactical brilliance. His raid on Panama City in 1671 was so devastating that it caused a diplomatic crisis. England and Spain had, unknown to Morgan at the time, just signed a peace treaty, and Morgan was arrested and brought back to London in disgrace to answer for an attack that technically violated it. Unlike most pirates on this list, Morgan's story had a happy ending anyway. Rather than face real punishment, the political winds shifted, war with Spain resumed, and instead of a noose, Morgan received a knighthood. He was sent right back to the Caribbean, this time as Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica, spending his final years as a wealthy, celebrated colonial official rather than a wanted fugitive. An almost unbelievable transformation from raider to statesman that none of the other men on this list ever managed to pull off. If your surname is Morgan, you carry the name of the single most successful privateer Wales ever produced, a man whose legend was so enduring that more than 3 centuries after his death in 1688, a major rum brand still uses his name and likeness on every bottle sold worldwide. 15 surnames and 15 threads leading back to one of the most pirate-dense coastlines in world history. Men who fought the Armada, sacked Spanish cities, captured hundreds of ships, and in at least one case wrote poetry about the whole experience. What's remarkable about this particular slice of history is how well documented almost all of it actually is. Court records, admiralty commissions, and even the pirates' own surviving writing, meaning very little of what you just heard relies on legend the way some family history does. It happened, it's recorded, and in several cases, the men involved wrote down exactly how it felt. If you heard your name today, comment it below along with what part of Wales your family is from. Subscribe if you're not already, like this video if it surprised you, and share it with anyone in your family who's ever joked about having pirate blood. Because for some of you watching, based on everything we just covered, it might not be a joke at all. I'll see you in the next one.